The 1980s are usually sold to you as big hair, shoulder pads, and the bright lights of the City of London. But for millions of us, that wasn't the decade we actually lived. Nobody made a pop video about the Britain where you rented your telly by the week, fed a coin meter to keep the lights on, or watched your mum make a pound of minced stretch to feed 6 people. While the evening news talked about the boom, your street told a completely different story. Imagine it's a Friday evening in 1986. You're eating chips out of yesterday's newspaper, the 2-bar electric fire is struggling against the damp, and there's a catalogue on the sideboard with things circled in biro that you know, deep down, are never actually arriving. You thought every family lived like that. You thought the ice on the inside of your bedroom window was just part of winter. Turns out, it wasn't. It was the hallmark of a working-class childhood in a country where 3 million people were out of work by 1984. The highest it had been since the 1930s. Entire towns were losing their reason to exist overnight. We aren't here for the top of the pops version of history. We're here for the real one, the one that shaped you in ways you're still discovering today. From the Argos catalogue on the sideboard to the working men's clubs that held communities together. These are the signs you grew up working class in 1980s Britain. If any of this puts a lump in your throat, stay with me, because every single one of these is going to feel like a part of yourself you forgot you had. Before we get into it, let's set the scene, because the 1980s in Britain wasn't one decade. They were 2, and which one you lived in depended almost entirely on your postcode. In the City of London, money was pouring in. The financial sector was booming. People were buying houses, buying shares, buying futures. The papers called it the British economic miracle. But in the pit villages of South Yorkshire, the steel towns of South Wales, the terraced streets of the West Midlands, and the council estates of Glasgow, the miracle hadn't arrived. What had arrived was the letter from the factory. The news that the pit was closing, the shift your dad didn't come back from because there was no shift anymore. This isn't a political video. We're not here to relitigate the miners' strike or debate Thatcher. We're here for something more personal than that. We're here for the memories of a working-class childhood, the smells, the sounds, the small rituals that made up a life, the things you never saw on the news but lived every single day. So, let's get into it. Here are the signs you grew up working class in 1980s Britain. The house told you everything. Let's start with the house, because if you grew up working class in 1980s Britain, your house had a language of its own, and every room said something. The telly in the corner. You didn't own it. A man came round every few weeks and opened a little panel on the back and emptied the coins out. You watched that telly like it might be repossessed any day, because it might be. And when Top of the Pops came on, everyone gathered round it because there was only the one, and you watched it together whether you liked the music or not. Then there was the coin meter, gas or electric, depending on which you had. You fed it 50p pieces like a fruit machine that kept you warm instead of paying out. The absolute dread of it clicking off on a Sunday evening when the shops were shut. Your mum rattling round the back of the sofa for loose change while everyone sat in their coats. And the good room. Almost every working class house in 1980s, Britain had one. The front room, pristine carpet, plastic covers on the good chairs, ornaments arranged just so on the mantelpiece. Nobody sat in it. Children were barely allowed to look at it. It was for guests, and the guests almost never came. Here's the thing most people get wrong about the good room. They see it as something sad. A room kept perfect while everyone lived crammed into the kitchen. But that's missing the point entirely. That immaculate front room wasn't neglect. It was dignity. It was your mum and dad saying, "We might not have much, but we have standards. We have pride." It was a working class statement of self-respect, in the form of a 3-piece suite nobody was allowed to sit on. The house wasn't just a place you lived. It was a reflection of how hard your family was working to hold things together. Every patched curtain, every rented appliance, every coin in the meter, it all told the story. And speaking of holding things together, let's talk about how your family actually managed the money. Because what happened at that kitchen table on a Friday night was nothing short of extraordinary. Money was a system, not a balance. If you grew up working class in 1980s Britain, there was a catalogue on the sideboard. Argos, Littlewoods, Kay's, Freeman's, Great Universal, you know the one. Heavy as a doorstep, glossy pages, everything you'd ever want. And none of it arriving. But you circled it in biro anyway because hope cost nothing. The catalogue wasn't just a shopping habit. It was the only viable credit system available to families who couldn't walk into a bank and get a loan. You paid weekly, a few pounds at a time. Christmas arrived in October and was still being paid off the following September. But it arrived. That was what mattered. Chip shop Fridays. If you know, you know. The one meal of the week that came in a paper bag and cost less than making it yourself. It wasn't a luxury, it was arithmetic. And the other 6 nights, your mum performed miracles with whatever was in the cupboard. Mince stretched with oats, stew that somehow fed 8, bread and dripping when the budget had nothing left to give, meals designed to go further rather than taste better. And yet, somehow, they did. Then there was the system, the jar on the shelf, the envelope in the kitchen drawer, cash divided up the moment payday arrived, rent first, gas second, electric third, school dinners, bus fares. Whatever was left, if anything was left, was yours to breathe with for the rest of the week. No spreadsheet, no budgeting app. Just a system that worked because it had to. We're often taught that financial literacy is something you learn from books or from having money in the first place. But here's what that misses. The financial management of a working-class household in 1980s Britain. Balancing catalogue debt, weekly payments, coin meters, and family meals on a fraction of what middle-class households had was a form of economic genius that never once got named as such. Your mum didn't have a degree in accounting, she just never got it wrong. The money ran the house. Your parents ran themselves into the ground to earn it. And what they did every day at that kitchen table, that quiet, relentless arithmetic of survival, is something that deserves a great deal more respect than it ever got. But as exhausting as all of that was, there was something happening on the streets outside that made it bearable. Something that no government policy created and no recession could entirely destroy. The street was your living room. Out at 9, back when the streetlights came on. No phone, no tracking, no check-ins. Your mum's voice from 3 doors down, or sometimes just a whistle, was the only notification system you needed, and it worked perfectly. The street wasn't just where you played, it was where you grew up. It was a classroom, a social club, and a safety net all at once. Older kids taught you things. Younger kids followed you around. Everyone knew your name, your mum's name, and exactly what time you were supposed to be in for tea. And the neighbours? They knew everything about your business. Every argument, every new purchase, every time your dad's car didn't start. But that knowledge cut both ways. It meant someone always noticed if you were struggling. It meant the woman next door fed you a biscuit and a cup of tea without being asked. It meant that when your mum was working a late shift, someone was keeping half an eye on you. Not because they'd been asked to, but because that was just what you did. The working men's club, the youth club in the church hall, the social at the end of the month. These were genuine community spaces, not shopping centres, not leisure complexes. Somewhere that cost almost nothing and meant everything. Somewhere that was yours. And here's what the standard narrative always misses. Social capital, the term academics use for community bonds and mutual trust, was being practiced every day on working-class streets across Britain in borrowed sugar and unlocked back gates and meals stretched to include one more child. The communities that are now mourned as lost weren't just surviving the hardship. They were built by it. The warmth on those streets was real, and it was generated by the very scarcity that was supposed to define the misery. You don't lock your back door when everyone around you is in the same situation. You leave it open. That was 1980s working class Britain. And it was something. Now, the week was hard. Nobody is pretending otherwise. But the weekend, that was a different matter. Because when treats were small, they felt enormous. The treats that meant everything. Nobody in your household went abroad on holiday. That was just a fact. Package holidays to Spain existed, but they were for other families. Your holiday was Skegness, Weston-super-Mare, a caravan in Wales with condensation on the windows and a slot machine 2 minutes down the road. You crammed into a car that shouldn't legally hold that many people, and you drove for 4 hours, and when you got there, it was raining. And it was brilliant, because when you only get one of something, you feel every single minute of it. The specialness of it isn't diluted by comparison with something better. It just is what it is. And what it is yours. That caravan park with the slightly damp smell and the communal shower block was your entire world for a week, and you lived every moment of it like it mattered. Because it did. Back home, Saturday morning telly was sacred. Everyone watching the same thing on one screen in one room. No algorithm deciding what you wanted to see next. No choice at all, really. Just whatever was on. And somehow, that absence of choice created something that 1,000 streaming services have spent 20 years trying and failing to replicate. It created shared experience. A whole generation who all saw the same thing at the same time and still talk about it today. And then there was the video rental. Friday night. One film, a big decision. You walked to the shop, because it was always a short walk, there was always one nearby. You spent 10 minutes choosing. You carried it home in its thick plastic casing, and you watched it together. All of you, in that one room, in front of that rented telly. We are now surrounded by more entertainment, more choice, more access than any generation in history. And yet, research consistently shows that people who grew up in this era report their leisure memories with a warmth and intensity that their children, raised on infinite content, often don't. The scarcity wasn't the problem. It was, in a way, the point. When there's only one thing to watch, you watch it properly. When there's only one holiday, you feel every drop of rain on that caravan roof. Abundance didn't improve on that experience. It just replaced it with something louder and less felt. And before we get to the final sign, the one that ties everything together, there's one thing we need to acknowledge. Because we've been talking about warmth and community and tight-knit streets, and all of that is true, but that's not the whole picture. It wasn't perfect, and that's exactly the point. Let's be honest about the decade for a moment, because nostalgia can sometimes smooth things over that deserve to be remembered clearly. The 1984 miners' strike wasn't an abstract news event for millions of working-class families. It was the year dinner was quieter, the year the conversation at the table changed, the year you understood for the first time that something bigger than your street was deciding the shape of your life. Over 3 million people out of work, youth unemployment hitting 1 in 4 teenagers in some parts of the country, school leavers going straight to the dole office, or onto a youth training scheme paying £25 a week to do a real job while the employer called it training. Everyone knew what it really was. Not all working class experiences were the same either. It looked different in Glasgow than it did in Bristol, different in Wales than in the East Midlands. For Black and Asian British families navigating racism alongside everything else, the 80s carried an additional weight that the nostalgia content rarely acknowledges. That deserves to be said. And yet, here's the thing about growing up in hard times. It doesn't only take things away. Sometimes it gives you something that easier childhoods don't. It gives you a tolerance for difficulty, a talent for resourcefulness, an instinct for community, for looking left and right and seeing the people around you as people you're in it with, rather than strangers you're in competition with. It gives you a sense of proportion. You know what actually matters. You know the difference between needing something and wanting something. You know what a real treat feels like. You know what it costs someone to give you one. And here is the quiet truth at the heart of all of this. You didn't grow up with a lot, but you grew up with something that no amount of money can buy and no amount of comfort can manufacture. You grew up knowing how to live alongside people, how to make do, and more than make do, how to find joy inside the limits, how to stretch a pound, how to hold a street together, how to be part of something. That wasn't poverty shaping you, that was community, and that is worth more than it was ever given credit for. It wasn't a perfect childhood. It wasn't always warm or easy or fair. The decade took more than it gave from a great many people. But it was ours. Every cold bedroom, every circled page of the catalogue, every chip shop Friday, every coin in the meter, every neighbour who kept the back gate open, every rented telly, every caravan in the rain, every moment on that street with the streetlights coming on. If you grew up working class in 1980s Britain, you know exactly what I mean by all of it. And you know that no documentary, no textbook, and certainly no pop video has ever quite managed to capture what it actually felt like to be there. So I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments below. What's the one thing from your working class 80s childhood that you assumed was just your family, until you got older and realised everyone on your street was doing exactly the same thing? The one detail that brings it all flooding back. Let's build the picture together, because the comments on this channel are always full of the best memories. If this one meant something to you, like and subscribe for more videos that bring back your memories, and share it with someone who was there. Because this is a story that deserves to be told, and the people who lived it are the only ones who can tell it properly. Next time, we're going back to the jobs that built those communities, and the decade that quietly took most of them away. Stay close.